In 2019, Glenfiddich hosted the Challengers Club, a world-first Billboard whiskey bar. We invited game-changing mavericks who shared their stories of passion and purpose along their journeys. This year, the Challengers Club is back. And this time, we've invited 3 incredible mavericks. I'll be having one-on-one interviews with each as we talk about their journey, their vulnerabilities, and their where next. We'll also be bringing in a roundtable discussion to look at long-lasting solutions to the challenge that gets the most votes. Glenfiddich will then host an auction, auctioning off some of their rare expressions in the name of raising funds towards the proposed solutions. A serial entrepreneur, somebody who fears nothing because he dabbles in so much. His name is Zuko Tisani. He's been involved with a number of things, including Legazy and other things, which we're going to talk about right now. Thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for having me, brother.
I want to get a sense of what kind of person you were growing up in Port Elizabeth. What were your interests then? What did you want to be when you grow up? Because you're a millennial.
Yeah, 93 baby. So I spent the first 7 years of my life in Port Elizabeth, raised by my grandparents during the time because I was a varsity baby. So came out of roads pretty much. Moving on to Johannesburg, came into some good schools, very white. Had some troubles integrating, obviously coming from Zwide, Port Elizabeth, into this, middle-class Johannesburg lifestyle. But what the education benefited me was obviously opportunities to go to UCT. And coming out of that, obviously, it's unfortunate, but those students are chosen for good roles. And straight out of varsity, I went into management consulting at Accenture and spent a year there really exploring myself.
I mean, I want to take a step back a bit because I think in some instances, family plays a big role in what we ultimately decide to do. I mean, if you talk about business, for example, there are families that are very business-minded, very business-orientated because maybe there's a family business. So what were the conversations, at home, about life and what one should be? Was business anything that ever came up?
Right. So I think my first glance at this was when my mother was retrenched at Uting, or the lottery company. In 2012, she went then on to start her own company. And my dad was full-time in corporate. So looking at those two lives, I wasn't really sure at the time, what I wanted to do being a youngster. However, seeing the two realities, it was very clear to me that one came with very high highs and low lows, and corporate just looked like it sucked, man. So I was willing to roll the dice on the entrepreneurship lifestyle.
Sure. What was that in your mind, being an entrepreneur? Because, and this question, some people say it's a typical question that Joburgers ask, what do you do for a living? So what is the thinking of what an entrepreneur is in your mind just growing up?
So an entrepreneur is basically someone that's unemployed. I always say I'm unemployed to whoever asks me. However, I think entrepreneurship in South Africa is really looking at some real socioeconomical problems that we see around us and try to address it. I mean, that's how I looked at it. I looked at what can I do within my own capacity because like Steve Jobs, who believed that no man is greater than another. Everything that we see around us was created by someone just like you and me. So I had ounces of confidence and was able to really take that confidence and drive it into whatever my mind was exploring at that time. I immediately wanted to explore the possibilities of expanding South Africa's footprint globally. I'd only left the country for the first time when I was 19 years old, and I was thinking, geez, if this is my reality and I was only able to see the rest of the world and get that education and insights now, how can I play a part to make sure that South Africans, do not foster too much on their own environment, but expand out? So we started Legazy Technology Conferencing. Long story behind that, but what it ended up being was South African entrepreneurs would come to Legazy and we'll take them over to big conferences across the world. So throughout the year, I'd go to 9 conferences across the world, whether in Vegas, Portugal, Hong Kong, wherever, and create a South African presence to the point where, the DTI got excited about it. So like, who's this guy taking, entrepreneurs across? Partnered with them, and eventually we created a presence for South Africa, doing a whole canopy for them within these conferences and really having brand South Africa represented across the world. So I felt really proud about that. But I think the basis of the situation for me was to say that South African entrepreneurs are not getting that global footprint. They're not getting accepted or being noticed outside of where they come from. They're not seeing their challenges, their competition. They're not seeing their miles of growth and opportunities to expand. So my whole thinking around it was, this is a great opportunity for South Africans to now become global brands. And I was able to do that by giving them that platform to showcase themselves outside our own borders.
I mean, this isn't the first time you and I are having an engagement, because in the Challengers Club, the first one, you were there, and we spoke a lot about what makes a challenger and what Mavericks do, etc. But what made you think you were cut out for this world you're in? Right. Because you talk a lot about the travel, and we'll talk about that, but at a personal level, I mean, what made you think you were cut out for the space that doesn't have all the security, lots of uncertainty, nightmares, headaches?
Yeah, I think for me, I just never saw myself fitting back into a system. And I think that's really where it all began. I tried it out. I worked as a management consultant. I worked in many different roles, and I was really good at what I did. However, I always thought, to expand on what I'm doing or to do something more creative, I was confined into that box. I was confined by the red tape of corporate. So I decided that my autonomy is strong enough, my capabilities are strong enough, I can smile and talk the talk, gift of the gab. And I knew that maybe that could get me far enough to at least explore these ideas to see if there's any substance to them. So it was having that confidence or that ability in God to say that, I can really give it a go. So really, I think it was faith moves, man.
And also a lot of learning. I mean, whether it's people, whether it's where you were employed. I mean, just take me through your journey of learning before your first project even came off the ground.
Yeah, man. So, I studied humanities, and whilst I was in varsity, I was the head of the Humanities Council, then went on to be the head of the Entrepreneurship Council, and I went to this big Accenture conference, and I remember it so specifically. What happened was we had the managing director standing on the stage, and I knew I had to make myself, recognized and noticeable here. So there's 12,000 people around, we're at the dome. I'm like, okay, just ask some stupid questions. I raised my hand, asked the question. He politely says, good question. Afterwards, I go chat to him at the back, and I said, listen, I'm the one who asked you the question, but I would like you to come to Cape Town and look at the talent that I'm holding at the Entrepreneurship Society. I really believe it's a great opportunity for you guys to invest in this talent, to really collaborate with that talent. And he gave me a go. He called me one time when he came to Cape Town. He said, I'll see you at 8 at the CTICC. And I grabbed, 5 top entrepreneurs who were doing one at the time. And he was impressed. He said, you've got an eye for things and you really are proactive about the initiatives you want to see through. He gave me an internship at the spot at Accenture. Having studied humanities, I went straight into Accenture Digital, and my world became then 4IR.
I mean, it's incredible. And I think, it's a valid point, especially when you speak about, taking the opportunity and seizing the moment. I think it's a strong theme in the world of entrepreneurship. But again, it's also about knowing which spaces to play in. With so many things out there, how do you know which direction to go? How do you know where the money is? How do you know where the opportunities are?
That's a good question. I think it's not about obviously following the money, but following your passion. So I obviously think quite deeply about what am I really passionate about. I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, and I'm really moved by the podcast called Masters of Scale that's done by the founders of LinkedIn. I'm moved by guys that really have been able to start from 0 and get to 100. Having been able to actually, see these guys in person. There was a mix-up with my tag at one of the conferences in Hong Kong, and I got into the VVIP. And now I'm sitting next to Jack Dorsey, who started Twitter. I'm sitting next to Travis Kalanick, who started Uber. And during this time, you realize that these guys, they were just willing to give that leap. So having this idea from the concept and evolved into Uber, evolved into Twitter, I then also thought, okay, so let me have this basic concept and write down a hypothesis that I believe I can see through. So I wouldn't necessarily start a startup in the healthcare space because it's not something that aligns to my passions. But if I do start a startup, whether in e-commerce or wherever it may be, I know I'm aligned to it. And I also know that, I've seen guys be able to drive this mission and see it through to the end. And that's where I stand, and that's how my my being works.
I mean, with Legazy, it's a story on its own, and I want us to go through that, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The highs and the lows, and it's an important story with you in particular because in the end, there was a conclusion. But let's talk about that. The birth of it and what you learned from that project and in the time you're running it.
So quick synopsis, I absconded from a project at Accenture. I was looking after, Barclays leaving Africa and leaving Absa as a bank. And what had happened was I went to this conference, and as I'm saying to you, sitting around Jack Dorsey and the likes, the owner of the conference comes up to me, says to me, so well, what brought you here? And I said to him, look, I want to bring this thing to South Africa. He says, okay, cool, bring me $1 million the next time we meet, and I'll host it in South Africa for the next 3 years. So he writes it down on a little napkin for me. I'm like, okay, fine. I come back to South Africa.
Where's the napkin?
I still have it.
Good.
And I knock on doors, and I get an opportunity from one of the corporates, one of the big TMTs, and they said they'll buy the conference. We go back to Portugal for the next conference and try to buy it. Unfortunately, these guys were like, we don't know if our audience is going to follow us into Africa. So, we'll do some research, but we're not sure. And I was like, okay, I'm unemployed. This concept didn't work. What do I do now? Knocked on more doors and got given an opportunity by Standard Bank to start taking entrepreneurs outside the country. Did that for the past 5 years. And yes, I had a lot of corporate support, but there were times where we were so strapped on, using our revenues to actually get guys the experience, that there were horrible moments where there wasn't enough accommodation for everybody. And I would have to now fork out from the profits to try to squeeze people in different spaces. I would be walking around the streets of Paris the whole night because I'm like, okay, if everybody's got a bed, as long as that's fine. But coming back and having to damage control your reputation at the time, because people were like, I heard this was going to be a great experience, but I mean, things weren't here and there. And it's worse when you have a credible reputation to you. Obviously, all the accolades, the Forbes lists and et cetera that came through. Then people look at you and like, dude, are you a hoax? What's going on? So you're not allowed to fall. You're not allowed to make mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. I've learned a lot from my mistakes as well. But there were a lot, and I felt that I never had the opportunity to really learn. As I'm saying, I started Legazy when I was 23 years old. And 28 this year. And during that course in time, I had to look like the thriving entrepreneur while still figuring out how to thrive as an entrepreneur.
Sure.
Which was a very tricky part of my life. And I'm really glad the COVID pandemic gave me an opportunity to just pick my head up and say, look, okay, cool, these contracts are paused with different corporates. I can now think about what's my next, what do I really care about outside of this. I thought I was just drowning and going in a particular direction without taking the brakes off.
I mean, we'll come back to that and the impact of COVID, but I really want to, because here's the thing, right? When you're an entrepreneur, it's quite clear that you open yourself up to so much because you give so much. So it's your reputation on the line. How do you manage that? And the fear that comes with that, those awkward moments where, in practice, it's different to this, acclaimed youngster who's been recognized, in so many ways. Yeah.
So for me, it's accountability. I mean, like for all my F-ups, I was the first one to raise my hand and be like, that was me. And I think it helps, obviously, the big guys would look down and say, you know what, I get this offered. I remind them of themselves at a particular time in their lives.
Right.
And that's really been such a draw card for me because, I mean, like, as I'm saying, I'm a go-getter, sometimes not knowing how to systematically move and get those things wrong at times. But when people can obviously see the intent, see the accountability to it, then you hold on to those relationships, you hold on to that network. And I've been very, blessed with the network that's continued to expand.
I also have to ask, I mean, a lot of what you did involved other entrepreneurs and helping them on their journeys. And you could have gone on and done your own thing, started your own business, made it all about you. So what is it about that? What is it about that you get that fulfills you in working with other entrepreneurs?
So the answer to that is similar to why I've started my most recent projects. I believe I come from an environment where the infrastructure does not support the entrepreneur. It does not support the dreamer, whether it's the government or whether it's private enterprise. It's very seldom that anybody will get the support that they want to explore their dreams. And I found myself in particular positions where I could support people's own dreams and possibilities. And that for me is, a cornerstone to who I am. So I wanted to support entrepreneurs in creating these opportunities where they could freely travel and explore these different ecosystems, because I realized that there was no one else doing it. No one else was giving them that support. I don't know who would write them a check to do that, but I, in some ways, had the capabilities to articulate the value to a corporate, to the DTI, to actually back these entrepreneurs, to actually go and experience this and let them grow as entrepreneurs for the benefits of South Africa and that company. So everything I do is aligned to how am I actually lifting up and creating my own legacy. As you know, the legacy play on words is.
Sure. And also, I mean, you've been exposed to many different industries and spaces purely by virtue of the kinds of entrepreneurs you've been dealing with, etc. Almost to an extent, it feels like, you go in different directions. So how do you bring it all back to, sort of a clear path in what you do?
I get pulled in many directions daily by entrepreneurs looking for that support. But I just try to keep my relationship with other entrepreneurs quite linear and uniform. So whether they're looking to get funding or support or technical support or whatever it may be, I try not to go too deep. So keep it not at an arm's reach, but keep it at a point where I can help them get to their next step, but not necessarily get myself in too deep. So I'm very particular about the projects I get involved in, regardless of how interesting the space may be.
And then out of the blue, quite literally, COVID happens.
Yeah.
And as a person who has built a network, globally in exposing entrepreneurs from here to different platforms, that must have had a profound impact on your business. What was that impact?
We were dead on day one, literally. So what had happened was we'd stopped the immersions of entrepreneurs and we decided we wanted to host our own conferences. So we hosted a conference called Startup State of the Nation Address, November 2019, before COVID 2020. And at this conference, we had all of the big guys in Legazy join us, Sandile Zungu, Dr. Julie Dlamini, and it was a long list of people really interested to support this ecosystem and grow it. And I found that the value that I was delivering on the home ground was greater than what I was doing abroad. So when we had planned Sona 2020, we had reached out to the president, and the president invited me over for a golf day. At this golf day, we explored talking about how do we support these entrepreneurs, and he said, what, he will come and be the keynote speaker for our address. Subsequently, I was invited to the State of the Nation address, sitting next to the most beautiful Miss Universe. Yeah, man, still don't have a number, but I think from that point in time, I was really excited for the year, and this was February. Everything was really lined up. We had contracts lined up to go to Paris and wherever it may be. And when it hits, it hits. It was immediate. There was no Mr. President talking at your event. There was no Paris. There was no anything. So I picked my head up and I said, there must be other businesses as screwed as me. I can't be the only one.
Incidentally, there's plenty.
And incidentally, there were many.
Sure.
And I knew that the last people that would receive the supports would be the entrepreneurs. Instinctively, I always look at how can I help and uplift a person next to me. I really find that's where I get my purpose and fulfillment. So we did the whole Save a Business saga. Save a Business was a grant funding mechanism where we raised money and we gave it out in grants to support entrepreneurs. Collaborated with Black Coffee, Nelson Magamo, and Laduma Ngogolo from Manxhosa. And we did a couple of auctions. We did a couple of live sets with Black Coffee, raised $1 million, and literally started asking for people's bank details and setting it out.
That was a beautiful story.
Yeah.
And I love how organic it was in the way that it played out, and also just highlighting the power of collaboration.
Yeah. So, it was extremely powerful. I was completely indebted to Nelson, Nati, and Laduma for their giving at that time. Obviously, Manxhosa also was a business that was suffering. Black Coffee couldn't play sets. Nelson was struggling to move his art. But they all were like, I'm going to take this opportunity to be selfless alongside me. And they gave me the opportunity to collaborate. And we did it. We raised $1 million. And, till this day, people are still writing letters to the UIF or to whichever other institution that promised them out some kind of severance check. Nothing came out of it. So we were like, we have to take matters into our own hands, or things will really get ugly.
And how, I mean, it must have helped, somehow, R1 million is a great deal of money. So, I mean, how far did it go in assisting businesses?
Not far. To be very honest, I think they had so many problems at the time that, the 50,000 or 20,000 that would send to them would be done by morning.
Sure.
Whether it's to cover the landlords chasing them, or whether it's to cover the staff that they haven't paid for 2 months. It was literally taken at moment's reach. But I think it was a long-term relief in terms of I can breathe. And a lot of entrepreneurs were given the opportunity to say, I can breathe because of Save a Business, and I'm really proud of that initiative.
So then let's talk about your sort of where to next. You've come out of a rough situation where things were looking up at the beginning of last year, and then all of a sudden things tanked. So what then was the direction for you?
Yeah, so, I mean, even if there was no COVID, I wouldn't go back to doing the conferencing business. It's a hard business, but it's a business that I found quite fulfilling. So I thought again, where do I align? And my alignment was, I was really interested in the e-commerce space. And we've taken a big gamble to create an e-commerce platform that offers a new opportunity, a new value proposition different to how people are shopping at this point in time. And I hope it's going to empower a lot of local vendors. We're strictly looking at South African entrepreneurs to host on this platform. And this platform, I hope gives a new experience for shoppers. Thinking about how local vendors really growing to become our favorites, the household names. And there wasn't really a real clear path to that. There's no clear path as to why Skoon would be your number one choice of facial products versus Dermalogica. So I'm looking at ways as to how do we look at the South African vendor, closer, and actually give them opportunity to actually be our number one choice.
I want to talk about the challenges, some of which you alluded to, in the money you raised to help entrepreneurs. Some had debt, some couldn't pay staff, etc. Why is it so hard to be an entrepreneur? And what are the difficulties that you come across on a daily?
I think the difference between entrepreneurship and a stable job is that you have to consistently win. On a day-to-day basis, I'm not just trying to say that you don't have to win on a day-to-day basis at work, but you're not necessarily starving because of it.
Sure.
That's the difference. And it's hard because it's not possible to win all the time.
And in the meanwhile, you have to also look after yourself.
Yeah.
As a human being, you've got your own needs, you need to sustain yourself, you might even have a family, etc. So, where then do you strike the balance?
I truly believe that we're coming into an age where that's becoming a trend. I see a lot of people sustaining themselves through being influencers. I see a lot of people sustaining themselves through their small startup. So I think now is possible. I think now people are able to reach an audience wider than ever before. And because of that, it gives people the opportunity to say, I'm going to give it a go. And with people having the ability to reach, we're starting to see more entrepreneurs being able to sustain in the last 4 or 5 years in the game.
Is it okay sometimes to let go? I mean, you've alluded to that with Legazy to some extent. And how do we look at it? Do we see it as you failed, or do you see it as, that served its purpose and I'm now done, moving on to something else?
It's so important to fail, Mo. It's so important to get punched in the face and figure out how to stand up, because if you don't have that capability within you, you always remain down. So getting knocked down by Legacy and being able to stand up, but then getting knocked down by another thing, I'm not on the ground as long as I used to be. I think entrepreneurship comes with really deep, bad emotions, whether it's debt, depression, anxiety. There's a lot that comes with it.
Zuko, you are a very driven individual, and you're brave, and you literally challenge status quo, and you've done this in many ways. Your story documents all of that, and I think it's a great story. Thank you very much for sharing that story with us.
Thank you so much.
And I'm really excited about embarking on this journey with you. And I mean, let's see what happens. This is where it all begins. So thank you very much, and we wish you all the best.
Equally so. It's going to be exciting. Thanks, Mo.